My name is Elaine Jones. I am a youth worker based at St Albans Church in Derby. I have a background in education, health and social care. Part of my youth work takes me into meeting lots of young people from lots of different walks of life, some challenging, some not so challenging. And this evening we're going to be thinking about Erickson's 8 stages of life cycle development. And we're going to reflect on that a little bit using some of the observations that I've made over the years of doing youth work, and I'm hoping that you will be able to equally kind of relate to some of these kinds of images. I kind of thought of it a little bit like wall building, and I have to say I had thought about building a wall of cake, but unfortunately my youth ate the cake, and so I am just going to use really boring old PowerPoint, hopefully, if it works. It might work, it might not, but you know what? It doesn't matter. So we're thinking about stages in life, where building bricks that make up who we are put into place. And those building bricks are made up of our experiences, the conditions of our environment as they take place. And of course this means that they will vary from person to person based on negative or positive conditions that occurred during childhood and into adolescence and beyond. By adolescence, the world around us is ripe for exploration, and the possibilities can be endless to so many people. And for many young people who have solid foundational bricks in place, then the next layer in which they build on them can be a lot easier to build on than those whose foundations are a little bit wobbly. Adolescence, I'm sure most of us remember, for some of us it was a very long time ago, is a time in life when so much change happens. Suddenly, independence, real independence, is looming. Physical changes morph us into something unrecognisable at times, and the big questions about how we fit into the world suddenly appear huge, and actually they become very real as well. See if this works. Yeah. Oh, there you go. Now, for young people who have had a freedom in the past to find safe and realistic independence, those who have developed a will to recognise that confidence, there is a greater sense as adolescents that there is a place for them in the world, even if they're still trying to discern how that might look. The things that they do and will to do are purposeful and enlightening. There we go. When there's a sense of hope towards and from those within our social spheres through a foundation built on a foundation of trust, the world is far more accessible. It's a place where it is possible to be somebody with significance. And a teenager who has foundations built on successful grappling with challenge and identity are driven by a notion to succeed, an acceptance of their worth, and an ownership of who they might be. If low self-esteem and a lack of confidence in their own ability has taken root in the place where independence could be, then the concept of finding a place in the world becomes obscured and can seem impossible to some young people. Where foundational challenges have not been resolved, the world can seem a very distant place. Fear takes the place of trust, and relationships are built on a sense of mistrust rather than respect, mutual respect and purpose. And it's those young people who find themselves in adolescent years seeking an independence, fighting for their right to choose and assert their freedom. And we often see those young people participating in reckless activity. Those young people with those attitudes that are a little bit defiant, a little bit challenging. Do you just love it when things work? Oh, there we go. I work as a chaplain in a couple of schools. One of them is a pupil referral unit, and many of the young people that we see exhibiting this kind of reckless behaviour share a commonality in that they have had missed learning opportunities in early years. And what that's done, it's resulted in an underdevelopment of interpersonal skills that they've taken with them into their adolescent years. And it's during adolescence that the building process is accelerated. And it's the foundation stones that are put in before in childhood that pave the way for success in the next step. And we can see that if those foundation stones have been tainted, that then a bit wobbly, that actually they don't make for very good next steps, do they? But often there is a deep sense of the need for spirituality that's often found weaving its way round this searching and questioning that goes on throughout the adolescent years. It can be a time when the concept of God, where the concept of relationship can take on a real, much deeper rooting. And I wonder that it is no coincidence that it is during this transitional period that this need is very much sought after. Now it works. We know that relationships are important in developing identity, and therefore flaws in the ability to build effective relationships based on trust and assertiveness versus relationships without trust are without purpose. They lack security, they're often propped up by guilt and driven by a lack of self-control. And it's those young people on the fringe, those reckless young people without purpose and hope, that are often the hardest to reach in our communities. But it's that very need for spirituality that can essentially make them the most open to the concept of God in their lives. Their flawed perception of themselves, the world, and their purpose are built on shoddy foundations that shift and move around where their circumstances change. And it's during adolescence that young people reevaluate and revisit what their identity looks like. But if those experiences in their childhood are without consolidation, if those experiences haven't been resolved, then the sense of competency and purpose becomes shaky, and it's even more difficult to try and discern who you are in the world. As a child, if gifts and skills are encouraged and nurtured, or if hopes and dreams are taken seriously, then the world in which they become a reality seems very possible. And those are the young people that I'm sure we recognise as the ones who study for the purpose, because their purpose has been validated. Their identity is not defined by their role, but by a deeper sense of validity. For others, it is seen... It's catching up, I'm really sorry. For others, we see this played out during the teenage years through exploration or acceptance, looking at different peer groups, sexuality, experiences and behaviours. Young people find a place in which they can relate to, be related to, and accept the people around them equally. And often this role is often played out within a role that they take on. And sometimes it's the role that becomes the identity. When areas are left unresolved, they're exposed and there's insecurity. And if it's left exposed, unresolvement paves the way for even more exposure and unresolvement. And this can lead to an even bigger identity crisis as they grow older. Now, we know that during later teenage years, the validity of love for a lifetime becomes plausible. But often, sexual experiences are confused for love. They may become an unsuccessful tool for a young person to seek that resolution from foundation stones that have not quite been successfully placed. One of the sad things that I have to deal with is unplanned teenage pregnancies. And I find that what happens is it catapults adolescents into a new area of crisis. It changes dramatically their identity. Their foundational mechanism for coping is completely disrupted. And we know that those aren't solely confined to teens who struggle with identity, but to all young people. And it's often clear to see the patterns that emerge within groups of young people that we meet with. For many young people, life is a constant crisis, with individuals leaping from one disaster to another. And it's also possible to see the connections between these different stages of development, and particularly in those areas of development that are slightly flawed. And we recognise the need for a spiritual identity. I'm going to leave that. They're supposed to all go back to blue. But of course, this is just a guide to help us recognise the processing behind behaviours, attitudes, and the thinking of teenagers. But it's not a diagnostic tool by any stretch of the imagination. Because I know, and you know, that teenagers will continue to adapt, surprise, and exasperate youth workers, because that's what they've done since time began, and that's what they will continue to do. And we as youth workers will continue to love them and to encourage them in the same way as we always have.